Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another MedFit webinar. Very excited. We have a special guest today, Dr. Joel Fuhrman, joining us from, I believe, Arizona. Advances in nutritional science for immune protection. Very important topic here. Coming back and joining us again is Dr. Joel Fuhrman. He's a family physician and best-selling author, 7-time New York Times bestseller. Currently president of the Nutritional Research Foundation, and he's on faculty at the University of Northern Arizona University. Go Lumberjacks. You've seen him on the TV shows, including his PBS specials, and we've had him here a couple times, and we welcome him back once again. Dr. Fuhrman, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Always fun.
Okay. I'm going to hand you over controls, and we'll let you get going.
Okay. Okay, I hope you guys can see that okay.
Looks great.
All good. All right, let's get started, because obviously there's a similarity here. In other words, it's not one diet that promotes human longevity and slows aging, and another diet that protects against infection and cancer. It's the same foods that are powerfully rich in phytochemicals and antioxidants that supports the immune system to protect against cancer cells from developing in your body and protect against microbes like pathogenic bacteria and viruses. So our immune system does it all. And our immune system needs to get adequately protected. It needs to be flooded with a high amount of micronutrient density in the body cells. In other words, the cells have to be rich in nutrients and contain a lot of antioxidants and phytochemicals. And that same phytochemical density, antioxidant density, and diversity, that's very important, promotes the best, you could say, diversity in the microbiome. You can't get a great microbiome by taking probiotics or healthy bacteria. You have to eat a wide variety of fiber, because the healthiest microbiomes have the most diversity of bacteria by feeding off the most variety of different type of plant material. So we're going here into superimmunity, and the foundation here of this lecture today, which we'll go over, is that we can win the war on cancer. Scientific advances have gone so far that we can wipe out 90% or more of common cancers, and also that we can live longer without getting demented or getting heart attacks too. And the most proven methodology to slow aging and improve health is this first principle of a Nutritarian diet, H equals N over C, which means you have to eat more micronutrient bang per caloric buck. And to do that, you have to know what foods are highest in nutrients, where you go about micronutrient bang per calorie. And the magic answer, the secret to this is all, of course, vegetables. The more vegetables you eat, the longer you live, particularly green vegetables have the highest nutrients per calorie and the most powerful effect at supporting immune function, because the ITCs, the isothiocyanates from green cruciferous vegetables, have tremendous effect to activate cellular mechanisms that prevent DNA damage, remove toxins, and increase DNA repair, and also activate immune function. Now, fat on the body does the opposite. Now, first of all, when you're overweight, you're eating more processed foods and you're eating low micronutrient foods. You didn't get overweight from eating too much broccoli. As a matter of fact, you can dial the appropriate weight you want by just the amount of green vegetables you are eating. If you want to lose more weight, eat more green vegetables. If you want to lower your glucose and get rid of your diabetes or reverse your high blood pressure, just eat more green vegetables, because you crowd out foods that are higher in calories, because green vegetables are so low in calories, and they're very high in, of course, they're the most micronutrient rich foods, and of course they're rich in protein. Green vegetables are more protein than they are carbohydrate. But anyway, fat on your body does the opposite, because when fat goes to excess amounts, which excess fat means more than 15% of fat for a male and more than 25% of body fat for a female. So that corresponds, but in any case, we can discuss that. But even 15 and 25% are probably not 100% ideal, but I'm just using that as a demarcation line between an abnormal amount of fat and maybe a normal amount of fat on the body. But in any case, as fat increases, you increase insulin resistance. That means insulin doesn't work as well, and the body has to raise the insulin production. And raising insulin production raises fat storage hormones, increases appetite, but does a lot of other dangerous things like increasing aromatase enzymes. Which increasing angiogenesis promoting enzymes, and that of course promotes the growth of fat and the growth of cancer. Angiogenesis is the growth of blood vessels to fuel fat and the growth of blood vessels to allow cancer cells to replicate. But fat cells are marginally oxygenated. They're moderately hypoxic tissue. They don't get a good oxygen supply and are not well perfused with blood vessels. That's one of the reasons why they create so much inflammation. Fat cells spew out a cascade of inflammatory compounds and free radicals that we call reactive oxygen species, which is the primary free radical that's produced. And that creates an effect on suppressing immune function, interfering with white blood cell activity, and the ability of the body to protect against dangerous microbes. Don't forget this chronic inflammation that people have when they're overweight means that their white blood cells are always activated and responding against inflammation. They run a higher white blood cell count. As a matter of fact, the normal range for white blood cell counts between 5 and 10 is not normal. That's where most Americans lie. Probably what's better normal is like 2.5 to 6. In other words, if everybody was eating really healthy, their white blood cell counts would be below the normal range. And I'm making you aware right now that my expectation is that having a white blood cell count of 3, 3.5, 2.8 are normal readings. And if you're eating so healthfully and your white blood cell comes up abnormal on your blood test and your lymphocytes are below normal, remember that that's a sign of increased longevity and better health, because the normal range is not normal. You know, when you eat so healthy, you're an unusual person to eat so healthy. But in any case, the spewing out of these reactive oxygen species also activates the fat to produce more aromatase activity, which means raises estrogen levels, which increases risk of breast and prostate cancer. And with the growth of the fast food industry and the processed food industry since the 1960s, obviously, we've had an increase in the rate at which the waistlines of Americans have been increasing. From 1920 to 1960, there was some increase in the waistlines of Americans. The average woman weighed 120 pounds. I think the average male weighed 150 in 1920. In the year 2000, the average woman weighs 160 pounds, and the average, but in any case, we can't, how could we say, undo the damage and the increased risk of heart attack, cancer, depression, mental illness, early life death, and of course, propensity to death by infection increases with overweightness. Here's a study on overweight women before COVID hit on 2.3 million people, and being overweight was a major risk factor for death from pneumonia, flu, and other infections. And it wasn't just obese people, even though that obese people had sevenfold higher risk for infectious disease-related death. It was still even 20 pounds extra. Even a 140-pound woman, for example, was associated with increased risk of early life death from infection. And overweight generally means malnourished, because obviously, the more unhealthy your diet is, the more you get cravings and you get addicted to eating an excess amount of calories, and your body gives you biological drives to increase calories when your body is micronutrient deficient. And also, you guys are probably aware that when you eat sugar and white rice and honey and maple syrup and white bread, and when you eat these foods, and by the way, white bread is a sugar equivalent, because white flour turns to sugar in the bloodstream at the same rate as if you just ate sugar. And these are not foods, they're drugs, because food has nourishment, sustains us, right, with vitamins and minerals, and that enables the body to utilize that sugar for energy. Because when we're using it for energy and metabolizing it, we're using vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and antioxidants are being consumed in the transition of translating that sugar into energy, causes us to utilize nutrients that the food usually supplies when we eat real food. But we eat white flour and honey and sugar, and then we're taking in the energy without the phytochemicals and the micronutrients that are associated with its utilization, so it's not great at producing much energy. You feel fatigued, and you strip the body of nutrients, and you store it more likely as fat, which makes you more insulin resistant. And of course, you become more lethargic. You don't feel like doing any activity or exercise, because you're just keeping your body malnourished from the increased processed foods you eat. And by the way, the American diet is now 60% of calories from processed foods like pasta and bread and salad oils and mayonnaise, donuts, cookies, crackers, rice cakes, breakfast bars, chips and soft drinks and candy and breakfast cereals. This is all garbage calories that people are putting in the body that creates disease. And it's no wonder that we have such a high cancer rate and COVID kills so many people, because people are malnourished. And then they eat 32% of calories from animal products. And you have to understand that a piece of chicken is like a bagel, because they're both sources of macronutrients, because the macronutrients are calorie-containing nutrients like fat, carbohydrate, and protein. But neither one contains significant micronutrient load. In other words, the vitamins, the minerals, especially the phytochemicals and the antioxidants, are not in the chicken, and they're not in the processed foods. They're only in those, obviously, small percent. What is it? 10% approximately of wholesome plant food. And the American diet is only 2% from vegetables, by the way, 2% from vegetables. The foods with the closest association with cancer. We're a vegetable-dependent animal. I love to go skiing. I go skiing and I see these condos and these big expensive houses on the sides of the ski slopes. And I'm saying people should buy these condos and expensive houses next to hospitals, right? Living next to hospitals, because they can get right across the street, because all they're going to be doing for their life is going back and forth to medical doctors and getting drugs and hospitalizations because when they eat them like the other Americans eat. Now, let's just touch on metabolism for a minute here, because I'm saying here that as you consume more calories than your body needs, it doesn't all turn into fat. It's about 3,500 calories a pound. 3,500 calories a pound of body fat. So if you eat 100 calories extra a day times 350 days in a year, that would put 10 pounds of weight each year for 100 calories of extra over my basal metabolic rate, unless I burned it off in exercise. Or 200 calories a day extra would put 20 pounds, but no, it won't. Because when the body takes in excess calories, it speeds up its metabolic rate by raising its body temperature, raising its respiratory quotient, the calories burned through breathing, and also, of course, raising thyroid function. And we have most heart attacks and irregular heartbeats occur in the upper half of thyroid function. I'm saying if you look at the normal range, the top half is not normal. It's the bottom half of the normal range that's truly normal, because you see more heart attacks and irregular heartbeats in the top half of thyroid function. We're not trying to increase thyroid function. Most Americans are trying to increase their metabolic rates, they think, so they can eat more food and not get fat. But increasing your metabolic rate means you're increasing the risk of death. You're creating a pact with the devil. You're utilizing in your stem cells, you're shortening your telomeres. By increasing your metabolic rate, you're increasing the rate at which you're aging. So even though when you're eating extra calories, you're aging faster. So all those calories don't turn into fat. So you only gain 10 pounds from 200 calories extra a day after the year's up, not 20 pounds. But those extra 10 pounds you burned up by increasing metabolism increased your risk of death by about 25% of a premature death. So we're talking here, we want a slightly slower metabolic rate, but eating less calories, because with a slower metabolic rate, it's associated with stabilization of the stem cells and telomeres and long life and improved immune function. So we want to, and of course, that means we have a lower body temperature and we can eat less calories without not becoming too thin. So it's totally, so everybody's backwards the way they think about food. We're trying to eat as little as possible, not as much as possible. And to review here a little bit, it's the standard American diet with its lack of nutrients in combination with excess body fat that creates the most chronic inflammation, which keeps the white blood cells in your immune system always running and activated. You keep the battery in the flashlight with a good charge. If you keep the flashlight turned off, so in an emergency, you can use the flashlight. It shows a bright light, right? If you keep your immune system chronically inflamed all the time, when you get infected, it can't activate, it can't demarginate, it can't work that well. And then adipose tissue, as we said, increases reactive substances like adipokines and cytokines and lipokines. And these, of course, damage immune function. So damage immune cell function. These inflammatory substances coming from fat supplies damages B cells, lymphocytes, macrophages, natural killer T cells. So the obesity and being overweight, even being overweight, moderately overweight, diminishes immune defenses and creates a chronic pro-inflammatory state. And then the insulin resistance, IR, means how much fat you have on the body, in combination with elevated glucose in the bloodstream, has a tremendous effects on because increasing risk of diabetes. But I'm saying right here that every person who's overweight is pre-diabetic. And there's no such thing as a healthy overweight person. And there's no such thing as healthy at any size. This, social movement wanting to convince people it's okay to be overweight as long as they don't have high cholesterol and high blood pressure or high triglycerides or diabetes. And there's no such thing. Matter of fact, the CDC just came out the last few weeks ago saying that 50% of Americans are now diabetic or pre-diabetic. And I'm saying any person that's overweight is pre-diabetic because before their sugar starts to rise in the pre-diabetic range, being overweight causes their insulin to rise, and insulin being up is also a pre-diabetic state that makes you at high risk of death and decreases immunity. So, and of course, looking at COVID, 90% of these hospitalized patients had underlying health conditions like high blood pressure, obesity, heart disease, diabetes. We're talking here about the fact that if you're eating a diet to create other diseases, then you're going to be, of course, let's eat the same diet that caused those diseases. You're eating the diet that caused people to die from COVID, and COVID is a disease of nutritional stupidity, just like being overweight is a disease of nutritional stupidity, as is high blood pressure, heart disease, and cancer are mostly diseases of nutritional ignorance. I shouldn't say stupidity, I should say ignorance, because everybody's doing it. And when everybody does something, it's the norm. And people, they just think they're eating the norm. So in other words, if you're normal, you should become overweight and sickly if you're eating American food, because the American diet is a standard American diet, which I call the DAD, the deadly American diet, because we're vegetable dependent animals. And the foods that we're dependent on for a heightened immune function are greens and beans and onions and mushrooms and berries and seeds. And so we're talking about when we have a huge variety of different types of plant foods, these plant materials and these plant phytochemicals work synergistically to support the immune cells to recognize and remove microbes, to protect the microbiome so the immune system attacks it at the first line of defense. The defenders at the gate of the castle are the interstitial lymphocytes that line your digestive tract, and the thickening of the biofilm that covers the villi is really another first line of defense that doesn't allow microbes to gain a foothold and really replicate dangerously in the body. So we're talking here about two extra things in the bottom, and that is we're looking for micronutrient density of your diet so you achieve micronutrient density in the tissue cells of your body, right? And if I weigh 150 pounds and I have X amount of nutrients in my body, but what if I weighed 300 pounds with X amount of nutrients in my body? Then my micronutrient density of the cells and tissues would be 1/2 X, right? Not really, because fat cells sequester nutrients, especially fat-soluble nutrients, over and above the level expected by percent of body fat. So maybe I only have 1/3 X amount of nutrients in my tissues because I'm 150 pounds overweight. And then when you have more fat on the body, you have more omega-6 fats and more saturated fats, which then lower your omega-3 index, greatly increasing your requirements for omega-3 fatty acids. And there's one way to improve our omega-3 index and reduce inflammation is by getting rid of the body fat. So then the amount of omega-3 in our tissues will be greater than 5%. Ideally, you want an omega-3 index to be 5% or greater. And there's a recent study came out too that showed that having a low omega-3 index like 2 or 3 or below 4 is equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes every day, because it reduced lifespan by about 5 years. And of course, reduces the risk of infection as well. So that we're talking here somewhat about this GALT, or gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which means these Peyer's patches, the mesenteric lymph nodes, and the interstitial lymphocytes lining the digestive tract, which probably is the biggest part of our immune defenses, the barrier between the human body, the external environment and the inside of our body. And of course, what fuels the growth of this? How do we have a healthy immune system that lines our digestive tract? And the answer is, it's these aryl hydrocarbon receptors in the cells of walls of the villi that are supported and activated by green vegetable consumption more than any other food. And we're talking about the different parts of green vegetables, the ITCs in green cruciferous vegetables. Even the sulfoquinavos in lettuce has protective effects on immune function in the microbiome. And you can see you kind of like atrophy, and the villi becomes, the immune system shrinks up and doesn't activate, and in reducing immune surveillance and the ability to protect against microbes. And microbes can come in more readily through the tight junctions between cells when we're not eating sufficient of these compounds that support the growth of our intraepithelial lymphocytes. And here, lettuce to the rescue means that we're finding out that these unknown enzymes used by bacteria feed on these substances in green vegetables. We're a primate. What do you think gorillas and chimpanzees and baboons live on? Mostly they eat leaves all day. And obviously, you know, the lowly lettuce, romaine lettuce, green leafy lettuce. Now we have these green sprouts and microgreens, and little baby mesclun and mixture of greens that are available in stores that are organic. You know, I marvel at what's available in the stores today, because we have this unprecedented opportunity in human history to be healthier and living longer than ever before, because they're taking the result of the studies on these superfoods, and you can go buy them. You can buy pomegranate, and you can buy wild blueberries in the wintertime, frozen, and you can buy leafy green vegetables, and even little baby ones that are in increased nutritional value all year round. It's amazing that we have the opportunity, as healthy as humans could have ever eaten in human history, to live as longer and be protected against microbes and cancers, and nobody's taking advantage of it. Well, some people are. Some people are taking advantage of it. They wouldn't be making these foods, but most people are not. And the COVID epidemic and all the death from COVID is demonstrative of all the people not taking advantage of all these healthy foods available in the marketplace today. So here's a study on the effect of fruit and vegetables on the inflammatory biomarkers and the immune system, of course, a meta-analysis. And of course, we're saying here that it's the amount of natural whole plant matter. That's not olive oil, it's the whole olive. It's not cashew oil or walnut oil, it's the whole walnut or sesame seed. You have to eat the whole plant with the full fiber and the micronutrient and bio and phytochemical diversity. It supports the healthiest immune function with the most infection protection. And here's a study that showed a plant-based diets on COVID death and morbidity, showed us a 73% lower risk of severe COVID or hospitalization with people who ate more plant-based diets or more plants. And the low carb, higher protein diets like paleo or keto diets, not even a carnivore diet. Some people eating carnivore diets eating mostly meats, but even just a higher amount of animal products where they're somewhat lower in carb and higher in protein, they found that with lower than 30% carbs with higher in protein diets increase the risk of severe COVID by fourfold increased risk of death. But of course, we're talking here about, we already know that these higher protein diets, particularly animal protein, increase the risk of early life death and are exceedingly dangerous, that keto diets have the most early life deaths, people dying. You know, we're talking about the average American male, let's say, lives to be 78, and you can live to be 98 if you want to by eating a diet. But if you want to cut your life short, maybe be a little bigger in the gym for more animal protein, you can cut your life and die at 65 if you want to be a little bigger in the gym. The point I'm making right now is that higher animal product diets are the most dangerous diets, and they also increase COVID death as well. And here's the immunity boosting foods are obviously the foods we're talking about here, which includes herbs and spices and onions and scallions and different types of mushrooms and different types of vegetables, and lower sugar fruits too. Well, all fruit, actually, the studies in the WHEAL study, the Women's Healthy Eating and Living study, showed that women who ate the most vegetables had low rates of breast cancer, but women who ate vegetables with fruit had less cancer than women who ate just vegetables alone. That it's more goes back the same thing. When you take nuts out of the diet or seeds out, you increase risk of cardiovascular death and cancer death. When you take the fruit out, you increase risk of death. Eating the most variety of plants in your diet adds for the most protective immune function. Raw vegetables, which we associate with the word salad, eating a big salad every day and chewing raw vegetables, saying make a salad half lettuce, half like other greens like broccoli and cabbage and bok choy and arugula with different types of vegetables with scallion or red onion in there, and then you put another seed-based dressing. Instead of pouring oil on your salad, make a dressing from hemp seeds and walnuts with some balsamic vinegar or tomato paste or tomatoes and almonds and fig vinegar, and we make these delicious dressings. We're peeling a navel orange with sesame seeds and cashews and blood orange vinegar and lemon, and make all these delicious dressings where the dressings are healthy. And my point here, of course, is that my mantra is make salad the main dish at least once a day. Have a big salad. Review of more than 200 studies so that raw vegetables have the most consistent and powerful association with the reductions of cancers of all type. And I'm teaching you today that the same immune function that protects against cancer protects against infectious death. And even when COVID goes down, or there's going to be a new virus that comes along, and pneumonia is still a cause of death, and the risk of the World Health Organization was still always predicting and a higher risk of infectious related death over the next decade, even if COVID never came across. So we're protecting ourselves with the foods we're eating, and comparatively to pouring oil on your food is lowering the nutrient density of your diet, taking the fibers and phytochemicals out of the food. And I'm saying something so incredibly ridiculous that olive oil increases risk of cancer and premature death because it keeps people fat. And even though olive oil might be a better oil than soybean oil, or it might be a better oil than butter or maple syrup, or it might be better than eating donuts, or it might be better than eating, in other words, what I'm saying, regardless of studies that show olive oil has beneficial effects, it's because they're comparing it to something worse than olive oil. If they compared olive oil to something better, like eating walnuts or flax seeds or something like a whole nut or even a whole olive, you would send, there's studies on that. The Prevamid study showed that switching from other fats to olive oil decreased risk of cardiovascular death by 15%. But when they switched from olive oil to nuts and seeds as a source of fat, then the risk of heart attacks went down by 60%. It's all about what are you comparing it to. And the Sydney Heart study showed that vegetable oils are more dangerous than red meat. In general, pouring fat on your food, it goes from the lips to the hips in 5 minutes flat. It prevents fat from leaving the body. I work as a nutritional physician for more than 30 years. When people pour oil on the food, they just can't get the weight off. It prevents them from losing weight. Almost what they do. The minute they get the oil out of their diet, the weight comes off very easily. SOS, sugar, salt, and oil. Being SOS free is probably the most important thing for losing weight. And losing weight is essential for cancer. And if you're pouring oil over food, how are you going to lose weight? Unless you're a world-class athlete or working out in the gym the whole day, or unless you're going to be working behind a plow 8 hours a day with an ox in the fields, you're not going to burn those extra, 600 calories. People put a few tablespoons of olive oil. That's 360 calories on 50 calories of lettuce, right? They have 40 calories of lettuce in a bowl with 300 calories of dressing on top. And they'll just drink the dressing straight from the bottle and forget the salad. And of course, the foods with the strongest link to cancer are processed meats and luncheon meats and barbecue and red meats. And of course, dairy is still related to ovarian cancer and prostate cancer. Even skim milk dairy is linked to increased risk of cancer because obviously it increases IGF-1 dramatically. The protein content increases IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which is a cancer promoter. And fried foods are obviously rancid. The longer they're cooked, the more they suppress immunity. And of course, the white foods, of course, the white of the bread, the sooner you're dead, And wheat flour means white flour. Don't forget when something says wheat flour, that's white flour. It has to say whole wheat flour. And I'm not saying whole wheat flour is good for you. Whole wheat flour is just better than white flour. It still can be ground into a fine pastry-like consistency and still be too high glycemic. The type of breads that are more beneficial are the intact grains, maybe the manna bread or the brand that's called Food for Life Ezekiel bread, that are made for like sprouted grains and not finely ground into a flour that have lower glycemic effects. So IGF-1 in general is no controversy as far as higher levels of IGF-1 shortening lifespan, suppressing immunity, increasing risk of cancer. And here's, for example, a study, and we know that animal protein raises IGF-1 the most, more than sugar does. And high protein diets that were low in sugar have been studied here. And here's followed for 18 years, people in the 50 to 65 range, showing a 4-fold increase in cancer deaths compared to those with lower animal protein intake. The lower animal protein intake, we're consuming about 5% of animal protein, or about 7.5% of animal product. We're the highest group with the highest risk of death. We're consuming about 18% of animal protein, which is about 25% of animal products, still under the amount consumed by Americans. In other words, this 4-fold increased risk of cancer deaths when the highest degree of animal protein or animal product was 25%, and the Americans consume over 30%. So So we're still, and a 75% increase in overall death over the 18-year period in the higher protein group. And these were people following diets low in sugar and white flour, of course, including more diabetes. Here's some more recent studies, particularly one that showed we have more studies corroborating each other. We give more studies more credence if they go on for decades. This had a 25-year average follow-up. And when you look at people's hard endpoints like death, you can say go on a paleo diet or a keto diet, and you're losing some weight, your diabetes looks better, but how do we know that's going to translate into a longer lifespan? Well, it gives you a hypothesis, so you can guess it might, but you have to really study it long term, because even smoking cigarettes can cause weight loss. And even so, we don't know if what's going to, so in other words, when we look at these studies long term, we show that more animal protein, more deaths. That's one of the most powerful findings in the scientific literature over the last decade. And of course, that corresponds with this shocking finding that more plant protein foods meant for longer lifespan. That means higher protein was better, but only if it was plant protein. So that means soybeans and hemp seeds and green vegetables and other beans and black beans and azuki beans and red kidney beans, all these high protein plant foods, including nuts, sunflower seeds, and and we're talking about all these high protein plant foods had this effect to extend human lifespan. So here's a study from 2020 with all cause of death, cardiovascular and cancer mortality, showing a dose response relationship between animal protein and increased death and plant protein and lower rates of death. Quite fascinating research that's corroborating this. And of course, I'm saying that the most evidence shows that these foods have powerful effects on immune function, and you're reducing processed foods or wiping out processed foods. That means you're a nutritarian. I coined that word, nutritarian, to represent a diet style where people are eating healthy, natural foods and cut out junk food, right? And we, either reduce animal products to a very small amount, or if you want, or you could be a vegan, but you really got to eat mostly high nutrient plants, and including these very protective foods, greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And as you know, mushrooms have powerful anti-angiogenic effects, and they lower estrogen. And flax seeds and chia seeds, these foods have dramatic protection against blocking estrogen stimulation of breast and prostate tissue. And beans, of course, have the most fiber and resistant starch of all carbohydrates, meaning they are degraded by bacteria. They're resistant to enzymatic degradation, and they have to be fermented by bacteria. They promote the growth of good bacteria, and they're high in slowly digestible carbohydrates, and resistant starch means they're not high glycemic. They only come in at about 1 or 2 calories a minute, keeping you not hungry for many hours, while they don't require much insulin to digest them. So when you're overweight or have metabolic problems, beans become your most favored carbohydrate. And of course, these plant foods that are high in protein are found to be lifespan promoting, like beans and lentils, soybeans and hemp seeds and broccoli and kale and bok choy and pumpkin seeds and almonds. We're talking here about these are all give us tons of protein when we're eating these high nutrient plants. And of course, the nuts and seeds highest in omega-3, which we're trying to get into, eating enough of these, each of maybe at least a third of our nut and seed intake, are walnuts, hemp, chia, flax seeds that are high in omega-3. And the highest protein nuts and seeds are hemp seeds, 40%, Mediterranean pine nuts, 40%, sunflower seeds, 30%. In other words, we're talking about these have as much protein per calorie as meat does, and the beans are even higher in protein than you would think, because they're listed as they're a certain amount of percent of protein, that's the amount of grams per serving, but considering that the carbohydrate listed on the bean is not all absorbed, because the resistant starch, 90% of it passes through into the toilet bowl. So when you think you're getting in 150 calories of beans, where like 30% is protein, you realize that the 150 calories don't all come in, because the starch calories, because maybe 20% of those, or 20-30% of the starch calories are lost, which then makes the total amount of calories as a percent from protein even higher. So beans, of course, are high in protein too. And to review what you learned today, what you're learning here is that we maintain those longevity proteins like SIRT1 and AMP kinase that protect our DNA and protect our telomeres and stem cells. We can live to be 100 years old by more phytochemical exposure, regular exercise contributing to the leanness and muscle density with moderate caloric restriction. So we're lean as possible for being strong and lean, not strong with a big belly. And then animal protein in excess of calories and high glycemic carbohydrates, of course, increase mTOR, and mTOR is elevated in 100% of invasive cancers, which then ages us and causes oxidative stress, promotes cancer, and makes it so we can't have good immune response against infection as well. So this Nutritarian prescription that I'm advocating is I want everybody to have a big salad every day. Lunch should be a huge salad, not even a 6-inch salad bowl, but a whole 9-inch salad where you're eating at least an ounce and a half an ounce of nuts and seeds with each meal if you're looking to lose weight. I'm, of course, not looking to lose weight. I'm very physically active. So I'll eat more like 3 ounces of nuts and seeds a day, and at least a half a cup of beans a day, at least a half a cup, and a large serving of cooked greens every day too, mushrooms and onions daily, and fresh fruits, and including berries. I want this to be part of everybody's diet. Your lunch should predominantly be a green salad with a healthy dressing, some vegetable bean soup with onions and mushrooms in it, and some fruit for dessert, right? So a Nutritarian eats a wide variety of high nutrient plants, removes empty calorie foods, uses little or no oil, and uses little or no animal products. And then, of course, if you're using no animal products, or even little amounts, then you supplement wisely with B12 and DHA and a little zinc. So here's a couple of examples before I go to Q&A. Steve and Tara, there's Tara on the left. She weighed 226 pounds. Steve weighed 447. That first year, Tara lost 80 pounds, but Steve lost 220 pounds in 1 year. Can you believe that? Just amazing. That of course, they got rid of their diabetes and depression and sinus infections and psoriasis. Of course, all these diseases melt away, including autoimmune conditions go away. People eating themselves to death. And of course, even their daughter Chloe lost 32 pounds, the 10-year-old, and got rid of her asthma. And you know who's super thrilled about this? The dog. Take a look. Finally has some room to sit in the car. And of course, I wanted to show you Emily 1 year later, so you could see when she lost about 100 pounds, look at her face and her skin tone and how much younger she looks 1 year later. Hardly even looks like the same person. We're talking about you actually age backwards. And I document that in blood work and telomere testing. We find that people can test their biological age compared to their chronological age. And so their biological age gets actually younger when they change their diet. And the blue zones around the world are areas where they live somewhat longer than the average American, but those aren't eating ideal diets. They're not using science to have best opportunity and availability of the healthiest foods in the world, like we can do here, like we have the opportunity today. You could live much longer. So many of my patients and people I've taken care of over the years, us Nutritarians have pushed that envelope of human longevity much more than a blue zone. So we're not duplicating the blue zones. We're talking about not just living longer, but living longer healthfully with our full physical capacity and mental facilities so we can enjoy our golden years and not have them be, who wants to live longer if you're going to be in bad health? All right, that's all I had to say to explain to you today and talk to you about. And now I can, I guess, stop the screen share.
Excellent. I will do that all, Dr. Fuhrman. Thank you very much. I'm going to bring you. Okay, Q&A. Again, thank you very much. We appreciate, all your information. It's always a pleasure having you on. And, I write down a few myself as we go. We do have some from the gallery. But, for me, it all makes sense, right? You even said your micro density of cell and tissues, basically as you are what you eat. If you want to be healthy, you eat very well. And, normal range is not normal anymore.
Right.
So considering the audience and everybody that, that really needs this information, right, is the sick and unhealthy. What is your biggest obstacle or, resistance or objection when you introduce this information to them? Does it seem, because normal is not normal, does it just seem so rigid or hard or out of line? I mean, what is it that you see there?
Absolutely, that's a great question, because the biggest problem is food addiction. because even people that are overweight, they can't lose weight no matter what they do, because it's like taking an alcoholic to the bar on the weekends. They drink more alcohol, it feeds them just want more of it. They keep thinking they're going to cut back and baby step their way in, and the minute they start having their French fries and their croissants, they just can't stop eating them, and they just keep binging. So there's emotional overeating, and I'm saying there's a biological underpinnings to the emotional overeating. It's not just emotional, it's physical, because you affect dopamine receptors in the brain in the same areas where narcotics and alcohol trigger brain consumption. So people get acclimated to overeating calories, and the brain gets overly stimulated, and then they get dopamine insensitive and feel like they get cravings, and they can't control their own behaviors. So they're not in control of their behavior. Their primitive brain wanting these needs met takes over their life. And they need a period of abstinence, and they need really some help. They need a coach. They need somebody they can depend on. They can't do it on their own. That's why with me, I mean, we have a retreat where people can come for a few months and learn how to make it taste great and stay consistent and get away from their addictive triggers. And people who can't, obviously not, people read my books, and obviously it gives them a lot of information, but very often having a coach, a family member, it's helpful when you're trying to quit smoking. When is making sure you don't have cigarettes around you, and everybody's supporting you when you're quitting. And you need a support system, because you have to treat this just like an addiction. You just can't tell people the right information, expect them to do it, because most of them aren't going to do it unless they have help and show them compassion, love, understanding, and tremendous amounts of information, education. And that's why a doctor can't transmit this information in a 10-minute medical visit. You need a person to spend time with this person and really getting to their issues and their emotional issues, and they're living their life and helping them through this difficult time of change.
Here's the health coaching. I'm a health coach, and that's how I make a career. And it's just people really need help, and it's not about telling them exactly what to do. It's about almost being like a caddy and carrying the bag for them a little bit, and maybe telling them not to use that club when they should use a different club, and just working with them. With that said, 60% processed foods, standard American diet, 32% animal products. Is there an entry level area to this? Is there a way to maybe just peck away at it, or introduce it in a way, one meal at a time, or what are your coaching practices with that?
Well, since I've been doing this for so many decades, and I did really, most people want to enter at that level, just change their lunch, for example, and they want to baby step their way in. But my experience over the last 30 years, that's typically a formula for failure, because if you go in 100% and you stay in 100% abstinence from your addictive triggers and this illicit love affair you had with your dangerous foods, you're more likely to succeed. And if I can track the people that have lost more than 100 pounds and kept it off for like 5 years or more, it's almost always people that went in totally with both feet and didn't leave part of their other addictions to be part of their present. Because eventually those people that go in baby stepping their way in and try to just still have those foods, they wind up gaining their weight back most often. They don't stay. You need enough time off the cigarettes, away from them, to lose the craving. You need some time off the sweets and the junk food to lose your desire for them. And I know it's hard, and you have to customize this for each individual. I mean, sometimes it's an art, because sometimes you could be too tough on a person and it could just drive them away completely. And other times you're not tough enough, and then they go off and gain all the weight back. So it is an art. It has to be tailored to the individual, but I'm just leaning towards my overall most common way of treating people, and that is convincing them to jump in with both feet and not to baby step this, because then the miracles happen. When they do this 100%, their psoriasis goes away. They stop smelling. They bowel movements move better. They're off their blood pressure medications. Their diabetes goes away. They have more energy. They sleep better at night. They move their bowels better. In other words, they see the weight drop off effortlessly. So there's just such an advantage to doing it all the way. I know the coaching and the doctors don't like to come on so hard on people, but if you can motivate people to go in with no excuses all the way, the results are even more impressive and more sustainable. You would think it's the opposite. You'd think if you go in too far, you're going to jump back the other way. But no, if you stay off the alcohol and you stay off the cigarettes and you stay off the junk food, it's easier to stay off it than constantly tempting yourself with foods that keep triggering you to go back off, eat the other foods again.
You know, as they say in the 12-step programs, give us 90 days, and if you're not satisfied, we'll gladly give you back your sick and suffering. So it works like that. You know, toxic relationships are toxic relationships, and none of them are healthy for us, even when they include our relationships with food. And not knowing and you know, being on that merry-go-round of standard American diet and 60% of it being processed and things like that. A lot of people exist in that world not understanding that that's not the way that it should be. So, you know, again, just more respect to you for bringing us this information. Big one on there is the sodium, oil, and salt. Is that, you know, really the first step? You know, I obviously it comes in with introducing all the fruits and vegetables, and just as you mentioned, you know, there you have to jump in. But the importance of that is that removing that from your body, is that as important or more important than introducing the micronutrients or the, you know, the nutrient dense foods?
Yes, it all works hand in hand. You leave any one part out, you don't have great success. You know, even salt inflames the digestive tract and causes endothelial inflammation, microvascular hemorrhaging. In other words, I'm saying here that the salt increases autoimmunity, suppresses immune function, and weakens the interior lining of blood vessels. So after 30 years of having so much salt, the blood vessels now can burst and cause a hemorrhagic stroke, because those, not just from high blood pressure, but from the years of high salt intake that's gone unchecked over the years. And then you don't pee out, when you don't take in much salt, you're not urinating out a lot of salt, and you're not sweating out a lot of salt. So now when you do high intensity exercise, and I'm hiking in the heat, where people are drinking, you know, they're losing electrolytes, they're cramping up, and because they're losing so much electrolytes when they sweat. And when you're not taking in a high salt diet, you don't lose salt when you exercise. You don't just lose, when you lose salt, you're not just losing salt. You're taking away other minerals out of the body with the salt. So we don't want to be constantly having salt being coming in and coming out at such a high rate, because we're making the mineral fluxes are too great. So what I'm saying, you perform better athletically and don't have so much loss of minerals when you exercise, when you have a low salt diet.
Okay, so let's talk activity then as well. You know, important part of this, medical fitness, right? We're here in the fitness realm. Many of our viewers today will be fitness trainers, which, and honestly, we're hamstrung a bit, because if we don't have the nutrition degrees and the you know, the credentials to discuss nutrition fully, it puts us in a spot where we could potentially be violating code of ethics and things like that of our fitness training certificates. But with that said, how do we approach that as trainers that maybe aren't, you know, formally trained with nutrition? There's certificates and continuing ed that we can take and things like that. But how do you ask that we would present this information to people that we're working with?
Well, to the best that you can, do as much reading and education yourself. I do have a certification course at drfuhrman.com, which we certify people as a Nutritarian coach to add on to their present credentials. But even if you can't do that, you know, whatever you can do to educate yourself. And, you know, and I'm proud of the fact that if you, when the lifestyle medicine community of physicians are surveyed, my books come out #1 as the books read and given to their patients from people who are using this as therapeutic modality for their patients. So I'm really proud of having taken that job to write all this material down for doctors and coaches and trainers to be utilizing this in their practice. So I think, you know, and the fact that I've influenced so many doctors and coaches and things, I'm really, really proud of that, having effects in it. Then it, you know, spreads out like rays of light to get people healthy. You know, so we all take a part. We're all working on this together, and so, you know, learn as much as you can.
Good, yeah, an investment in education will certainly pay off for that. Okay, advice for folks with ulcerative colitis. We're into some of the questions from the gallery now.
Ulcerative colitis, it depends on what stage of ulcerative colitis they're in. If they're actively bleeding, they can't eat much raw food. They have to have everything cooked. So, and they need some bowel rest too. So I generally have been had people make complete recoveries from ulcerative colitis by putting them on juices and fasting and giving them zucchinis and mashed and thinned out mashed potatoes with no skin, and giving them special diets with high dose fish oil. So we have, so I think it's kind of an advanced question that I do have a newsletter, I think, that discusses my inflammatory bowel disease a position paper on the website where they can read more about it, because we have to introduce food more gradually until they stop bleeding. We still want to give them a high nutrient diet, but we can't give them all the raw vegetables at the beginning. It could be too rough on their gut.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. We have a question here. I have low blood level of sodium. Does salt have the same effect on me? Should I decrease the consumption, or does my body need it? I eat a lot of salt. That's from Nita.
Yes, usually people who have low blood sodium, they're drinking too much water, which keeps them chronically hyponatremic, and the extra salt keeps them wanting to drink too much. You know how people say drink 10 glasses of water a day? That's because the diet is so bad, and it keeps people overly thirsty, and they lose so much. So what I'm saying is, yes, that she's flushing her body with too much salt and too much water. She needs to cut out the salt and probably reduce her water, and her sodium levels will come back to normal and over time. So she's definitely has to reduce the salt and forget about the low blood sodium being a little bit low for now, and just lower the salt and lower the water. You know, on a healthy diet, you're drinking when you're exercising and playing tennis, a hard singles match. I'm going to drink an extra quart of water, but on the day when I'm not exercising, I'm only drinking 2 or 3 glasses. I'm not drinking like 10 glasses of water, other than what's required with exercise. You know, what's fun now that I'm climbing mountains, and I have my dog, who I train to like mountain climb with me, to even he could go up really steeps, like even stuff you think you need handholds, and I hold on to his backpack and I pull him up with me, and you know, on the really steeps, and he's confident to do it with me, and he carries the water on his back, mostly for him. I don't need that much water, but it's fun to have somebody else carrying your water for you.
It's a great place to be hiking up there. Northern Arizona is some of the best.
Well, I live in San Diego.
You are in San Diego though, but okay. I understand.
I'm just on the adjunct faculty at NAU, and I did my research office there. But I live in San Diego. My retreat where people come to see me is in San Diego too.
Well, nothing's better than San Diego, so I apologize for that. Okay, tofu, always a hot topic. Is tofu considered a processed food, and is it good to decrease the consumption of tofu?
Semantically, tofu is made from soy milk. It's not made from the whole bean without the fiber, like edamame, tempeh, and dried soybeans are. So you'd think the anti-cancer effects would be somewhat less than the whole bean. But the studies on tofu and soy milk still show significant protection against prostate and breast cancer. We have a meta-analysis and many studies done to show that soy protein, the genistein in soy, blocks the estrogen receptors in breast and prostate tissue and activates the E2 receptors in bones and muscle. So you know how postmenopausal they think that women, as estrogen levels go down, they're more prone to osteoporosis. But soy helps stimulate those E2 receptors to help maintain bone mass with aging. So yes, a moderate amount of tofu is okay, but still the best anti-cancer effects come when you eat more whole soybean, like dried soybean made into a chili or soup, or edamame, the boiled beans. So I'd still recommend you don't only eat tofu. And still you're trying to eat a variety of bean products and not just one food like a soybean or a tofu anyway. So it's one of the things, you're not eating that much tofu because you're eating it in a variety of foods of other beans and other that you're eating, you know.
Very good, very good. Okay, some of the questions that, one more here that we had on you mentioned increasing the metabolic rate is actually increasing aging. I may have copied that incorrectly.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's correct. So if a person is active and they hike and ski and swim and yoga and bike and what does this mean?
That doesn't increase the metabolic rate.
Okay.
That's different. They were talking about a basal metabolic rate, your core body temperature, how much you're burning calories at rest. Not when you're activating muscles, that's the effect, the opposite effect, because now you're pulling out the growth hormone to be locally into the muscle tissue, which you're having less growth hormone stimulating breast tissue and prostate tissue and benign hepatic hypertrophy. So that's the opposite effect. The only safe way to burn extra calories is through exercise, and those muscles stay metabolically active, burning more calories, but they did not increase your basal metabolic rate. They did not increase your thyroid function to a higher level. They did not increase your body temperature, and they did not change your respiratory quotient, the metabolic parameters at which you're aging at. As a matter of fact, they might have even lowered it somewhat, made you more, keep you lean and make your body temperature even lower. So we're talking about running a slightly lower body temperature, less body fat, where you're a little colder in the wintertime, but you're not bothered by the heat as much in the summertime. So exercise is not the same thing as eating to increase your basal metabolism, eating more calories. You follow me?
Okay, so stay moving.
Right.
And lastly, we did have a couple questions on your programs and on both programs for people who are looking for coaching, and then programs for your nutrition courses and getting certified for the professional. Why don't you discuss them quickly and direct them as to where they can go to find information on that?
Yeah, we have a program starting, I think, at the end of this month, a 4-month program for certification. They should go to drfuhrman.com and go to the classroom page. And part of it, you're watching videos and reading, but also there's some live interaction and live part of the teaching courses in the classroom as well. We want to make sure they have the information, but also know how to apply it with people and how to improve their own business development so they can, and then of course we can post them on the page a little bit about that person, so people needing Nutritarian coaching could come and see a little bit about them and choose them as their coach, even in their area or even with phone. But in any case, yes, so if people could come to drfuhrman.com or call and we'll give them more information about that course. But otherwise, you know, whether you join the course or whether you do it on your own, if a little extra information in more depth so you can become a teacher is the key. Because even you presenting little presentations, and you're not, you know, so in other words, it helps for you to know more because you come across like you know what you're talking, but also because you do have this knowledge that can help people get better results and give them more confidence in that you've had this training.
Excellent. Dr. Fuhrman, that is the hour. We appreciate you, thank you once again, and appreciate you for coming on. It's always a pleasure, and we appreciate the information. And I know that our audience does it well as well.
Thank you. All right. Good seeing you, everybody.
All right.
Take care.
Likewise.